Я всіх вітаю. Ми сьогодні зібралися представити наш черговий моніторинг в рамках проекту «Контроль витрат на відновлення», який проваджує Інститут економічних досліджень та політичних
Welcome to
консультацій.
everybody. Today we are making just one more monitoring in the framework of the monthly monitoring done together by the Center of Economic Strategy, the Technologies for Progress with the support of the European Union and other partners. This event is taking place in 2 languages. Please use the button translation in Zoom in order to get either the Ukrainian or the English channel.
Сьогодні, з огляду на те, що в нас дуже важлива тема – це соціальне житло в Україні, що будують і що фінансують, і яка
So today,
ситуація з
taking
ним.
into account that we have a very important topic, that's social housing in Ukraine, what is being built and what is being financed and what is the situation with it, we have quite a lot of nice speakers. We will be talking using this topic. We decided not to spend attention to the main part of the monitoring, which is repeated from month to month, where we explain about the latest changes in legislation, as well as some separate figures, what is happening at DREAM and what is happening with the recovery. But this presentation is already ready. You can get to know it. The link will be put in the chat. Please, I would like to ask you to write your questions to speakers in Q&A or chat, or comment on something to make sure that our discussion would be live and productive. In the beginning, first of all, I would like to look at the Ms. Temilina will talk about the key aspects related to what is happening in social housing, the problems and the status.
Доброго дня. Зараз відповідно поговоримо про тему нашого випуску соціальне житло і почнемо з проблематики, чому взагалі ми
Good afternoon, colleagues. Let us talk about today's topic, the social housing, and let's talk about the problematics, why we are talking about it in the first place. In the beginning of the 90s, we had a major privatization of the housing, but in such a way the state was left out without the social housing. The problem started to be more acute. In the beginning of the war, we used to have 3,000 apartments as at 2021, while with the start of the full-scale invasion, we had more than 5 million of the internally displaced people. So the question related to the provision of housing is one of the biggest challenges. If we talk about the social housing and the legislative framework, it is regulated by the law of Ukrainian Housing Fund for social purposes. It also includes social housing for the internally displaced people. Housing in Ukraine from the Social Purpose Fund is apartments in apartment buildings, manor single apartment residential houses, and residential premises in social dormitories. There's been some changes, taking into account that the dormitories have become, people can live. This is not the ideal solution. We need to make the inventory of housing. It's a good idea, but it does require effective implementation and coordination of efforts. Also, the law provides for the priority right of IDPs to receive compensation for damaged housing. However, it appears that IDPs with temporarily occupied territories are further restricted in this right. The first draft law on the basics of housing policy was developed, in particular for the formation of a policy on social housing, but it needs to be finalized. It should also substitute the housing complex that we inherited from the USSR. Based on the data from the International Organization of Migration, there are 3.6 IDPs in Ukraine. They all have the right to temporary social housing at the place of actual residence. Housing is provided for up to 1 year, but the term of residence can be extended. The following have the primary right to housing from the fund: large families, families with children, pregnant women, disabled, pensioners. Also, we have other elements of the infrastructure, like Ukrzaliznytsia. You can look it up on the platform. Within the oblasts, what is the situation with internally displaced persons? You can see that the situation is quite critical in reality. In reality, On one of the first slides, it was mentioned that they started to build actively the modular houses for IDPs. That is done by the UNHCR and the Red Cross Society. And there are also other organizations, for instance, Housing for IDPs, taking into account that IDPs will be cooperating with the local authorities. They also do the audit of unfinished buildings and non-residential premises in order to complete or convert housing for IDPs. So what you see on this picture, this is the implemented example, the project of the charitable approach. What could be the next steps? That's priority number one, to update the residential code, because we know that they're working in this direction. The public-private partnership is actually a very good solution. It will allow to develop the market and to make it more transparent. Of course, it's about the rent, it's the state subsidies for the construction or the rent of housing. That's all from my side. I tried to quickly describe it because we have a lot of speakers today, so we wanted to hear from them as well. And also the other things which are not included in the presentation, you can get them from our website. Many thanks for your attention. I will pass the floor to Alexandra. Many thanks. When we talk about the social housing, it's been a lot of years ago, with a big surprise that we actually don't have any social housing in Ukraine and in the European Union. Sometimes it's 30%. And this is a big difference because since we had the privatization of the free of charge housing, we have the apartments, but the state now doesn't have the possibility to maneuver in supporting the vulnerable population. First of all, I would like to present our speakers that will be today. We have Natalia Kozlovska, the Deputy Minister of the Development of Hromadas, Serhiy Sukhomlyn, the head of the State Agency for the Recovery of Ukraine, Konstantin Belikhov, the Deputy Head of City Mayor of Ivan Verbitsky, the expert from SEDEX. Also, we have Krivo Krivolap, who have to join us. That's the managing partner and co-founder of the Center for Economic Recovery. In the first place, I would like to pass the floor to Natalia Kozlovska. Over the previous year, we have had a lot of discussions of the new law about the housing policy, where a lot of questions are mentioned to the social housing. Please, could you tell us a little bit more about the policy of the state in this respect? And as far as I understand, the law was approved that the compensations to IDPs will be given to the destroyed or damaged housing on the territories which are temporarily occupied. That's a big move ahead. We will be talking about that, but we are also interested what will be with social housing, what are the compensations mechanisms, and how can they be done. Welcome, colleagues. You can hear me well. Welcome to everybody. I would like to inform you what is done by our ministry in the context of this change of the legislative framework in terms of the housing policy. This year, we started a huge work jointly with the wide circle of international partners in terms of changes in the legislation which regulates the housing policy. I would like to remind that in Ukraine, within the housing code that was adopted back in the USSR in 1983. So we still live by that code. So anything that we have, all the approaches that at the moment exist in our legislation, they absolutely don't comply with the challenges of the day. And in case we take specific examples, then the philosophy of the availability of the housing fund, of the private form of ownership, and let me remind you that this used to be 98%. This has not allowed Ukraine to cope with that huge number of IDPs that at the moment we have in Ukraine. But at the same time, the countries of the European Union, who unfortunately also our citizens left and who received the possibility to use sustainable housing solutions in the countries of the European Union. What does it say to us? The ones that exist in Ukraine, they don't allow us to react to those challenges that can appear, and we need to significantly change the philosophy. So we have decided for ourselves, and we started on working on the law about the general basis for the housing policy, together with the European Commission, European Investment Bank, the World Bank, who took leadership to oversee this process. The European Economic Commission of the UN, IOM, the Norwegian Refugee Council, the UNHCR, on Habitat, the Office of the Council of Europe in Ukraine, jointly with whom, with such a big circle of support, we have prepared a new draft law that will be acting as substitute of the previous code. So in this draft law, we absolutely changed the idea how this housing fund is published and what is the management of this. It's also in the facility plan, and also in the facility plan we have two key jobs. That is the social housing that will come to substitute the existing law, because the existing fund is not absolutely not working. It didn't allow to be implemented before. It also doesn't allow to implement it now. And all international partners who have the wish to help Ukraine in forming housing funds of social purpose can't do this, because the legislation that we have at the moment, it can't implement the principles that can formulate such funds. So now the first law, this framework law about the housing policy, it was concurred, adopted and approved by all executive authorities, supported by the local government association of territorial hromadas, the oblast military administrations. It was approved at the government committee, and now we expect the adoption at the governmental meeting, and I really hope that still this year this mentioned law will come to the Verkhovna Rada, where we will be able to really come to its adoption. So in this context, we moved very actively, and this framework actually allows us to do this. When it comes to other jobs that we have in the framework of the facility plan, it's the development of the national housing strategy that will allow to change other legislation, which one way or the other affects or regulates the issue of the housing policy. I'd like to say to everybody that the housing policy is not only about the mechanisms of provision of housing, that's also the mechanism of formation of the fund, management of that fund. So that is the legislation that is quite wide, and it all requires absolute review of the philosophy of its existence and management. In parallel, our partners, jointly with our ministry, started the work on the development of draft law about social housing. We really hope that we can move to public consultations with this draft law, already starting with February next year, without waiting for the adoption of the main law about housing policy in general. Once it's adopted in the first reading with the law on social housing, we can go to public consultations in order to speed up the implementation of this legislation on the territory of Ukraine. At the same time, in parallel, we conduct the work together with the European Investment Bank in terms of the implementation of the pilot project, with a significant financing on forming such funds already on the territory of settlements in Ukraine. Now our ministry is developing the draft resolution that already has the norms and principles which are cross-cutting within this new legislation that I'm talking about. From the one hand, it will allow us in the practical area to show to the Ukrainian people, to the local government, that this is possible, that is possible to be implemented, and to understand in which way this can be managed and to make people interested to form such funds. Why this is important for us? Because nowadays we have the officially registered in the Ministry of Social Policy more than 4.6 IDPs. We understand that for us, we have 4 key directions in which we can resolve the housing issue. The first area is the recovery of those multi-storied apartment houses which are damaged and that are subject to recovery. That will allow the citizens to go back to their homes. That's first area. The second important area, for those IDPs who at the moment are economically active, they need to take into advantage of the special mortgage projects, so they can choose them and really resolve this housing issue for a long-term perspective. This will provide that such IDPs will further stay, will further continue support their economic activity, having certain obligations under these mortgage loans. And we have the positive experience of such project, which was implemented together with the government of Germany and the Ministry of BMZ in terms of the special lending, and we will be expanding this direction because that gives the possibility already now to get the special loans for IDPs. The third area of the prospective character, that's the draft project for formation of social housing funds on the territory of the European Union. That's affordable housing for citizens of various categories that they require it for different reasons. But we, in the first place, having such a big problem on the territory of Ukraine, will be concentrating mainly on resolution of the housing issue for IDPs. And number 4, very important direction that we are talking about is the direction about assistance for living of the IDPs, so they could give themselves the possibility to live somewhere. So these 4 areas, in our opinion, cover all categories of IDPs who have one or the other status, one or the other financial capacity, and correspondingly, in one way or the other, they can resolve their housing issue. Thank you so much. I would like to clarify. Basically, this draft law that we are talking about the basics of the housing policy, is just a start. Then you expect a lot of work ahead, not only within the law on social housing and all the resolutions and all the legislative aspects. So I think it's just the start of this number of events and number of measures. Yes, we have analyzed it, that we would need to introduce amendments, if I'm not mistaken, to some 70 laws and the development of more than 20 resolutions of the Cabinet of Ministers, thanks to the partners who are helping us. Basically, the certain results already there for this huge number of laws and bylaws. They're actively being developed because we're expecting that the law under the dome of the Verkhovna Rada will not be significantly changed, and we will be very quickly able to provide for its implementation because we are all very interested in this. Many thanks, because really we would need, of course, we would need to write down all the mechanisms, how to calculate, who to give to the social housing. But as I said, I'm very happy that these changes are finally in progress. But I can only imagine that huge number of work. I don't think you can imagine it. I can approximately imagine it, knowing certain processes, but yeah, of course, I was not a part of this project. Together with Tatiana Bonka, we will talk about it, but I know that she has definitely been engaged into a similar process. And now I would like to pass the floor to Serhiy Sukhomlyn. When we talk about the construction of social housing, and we can see this in the draft law that we are discussing, Basically, a huge importance will be that we'll have enough construction companies who would be ready to build such housing. Sometimes we're talking about, in different countries, about different companies. That's not even the developers' companies, the construction companies that are building the commercial housing. So from your experience working in the agency, because the agency is engaged in the comprehensive recovery, what things we can expect here? Do we have enough companies who will be building this housing? Maybe you can also say something about it. Good evening. Really, in order to quickly and effectively build these projects, the sound is very bad. The connection is terrible.
О, зараз краще.
Дійсно, викликів достатньо багато, але для того, щоб і швидко, і ефективно реалізувати дані проекти міських громад, хочемо так, що сама реалізація...
In order to quickly and effectively implement this in Hromadas,
Що ми для цього маємо зробити? Сьогодні
no, the line is too bad. So what we have to do with this? Nowadays, we must provide 5, 8, 10 projects which will go through the expertise.
Я дуже перепрошую, наші перекладачі говорять, що дуже поганий звук, їм важко перекладати зараз.
Apologies, but the line is absolutely bad. It's very difficult to translate. We can't hear you. Can you reconnect through your telephone? Let me take the headphones. Allow me to pass the floor, if possible, to Grzegorz Gajda once you're connecting. Could you please tell us about the program that Natalia has mentioned? What is the financing? What are the criteria for construction? Would this be an energy efficient construction? What exactly are you planning? And then we will go back to Mr. Serhiy. Answering your question, thank you. We can say that really we have quite very specific negotiations to give to Ukraine financing in the amount of 400 million euro, which will consist of the share of grants and share of loans for the construction of public housing. All this housing has to be built using best European practices in this sector, also in the framework, in the issue of placement of this housing, the technical parameters of these buildings, the design of these buildings. So it has to be high quality housing that should provide high quality of living conditions for people. Certainly this has to be housing with the best energy efficiency standards that should be built back better rather than just returning what used to be, but to really to build with the best standards in mind that we have today. This has to be the housing that should be placed somewhere in good, normal, developed parts of the cities. That means there should be access to infrastructure, both technical and social. And I would like to say more that for us, this first project is just the beginning of cooperation. We believe that it's not possible to stop here, and we will be in parallel work on the next steps to make sure that permanently we cooperate with Ukraine and increase the amount of social housing of that level, that this sector would be really self-sufficient and when this sector financial accessible, but once it pays back, these are two elements. It's really the basis for the good governance of this sector. That's also the prerequisite of maintaining these homes. we don't expect that the state should pay additional to this sector so that the houses would be maintained in the proper conditions. So we have to find the proper scale to make sure that the sector would self-finance its operational activity. Thank you. Are you planning to work in all regions of Ukraine, or just you are selecting some pilot regions that we will be doing the first priority? With Ukraine, this cooperation with Ukraine, we will be choosing these regions and we will be checking two main characteristics of this. On the one hand, this will be needs. On the other hand, this will be the interest of the cities, of the regions to build such housing in cooperation with us. But yes, you are right. The selection of regions and announcement, this will be also permanently in the future. Many thanks. Mr. Serhiy, can you please wait? There is the question to Natalia, and Natalia will need to go. So, yes, I'm connected. I'm on the way, so maybe the connection may not be perfect, but okay, I'll try my best. In case, if possible, there is a question to you. When and how will the audit of the available housing fund be conducted? This is within the law about inventory. We are now cooperating with UNHCR to make sure they can help us to provide technical implementation of this process, because based on our clear understanding and in accordance with the law that I have just mentioned, we would need to formulate the so-called register of such housing that we're talking about, and definitely the draft law that you're talking about, it exactly could be its component as such housing that can be re-equipped for IDPs. Thank you. Mr. Serhiy, apologies for this inconveniences, but the questions that you have asked about the challenges, you said that you will be building this housing already, you're already recovering. Do we need to change the standards, the construction standards, or we already comply with what is believed to be high quality housing, or you will have some certain challenges in terms of the housing standards?
Давайте, певно, я відповім, що по
Again,
питанню, що
bad connection.
стосується наявності
Allow me
нормативної
to
бази в
start
Україні, яка
answering to this
відповідає принципам
in terms of the issue
енергоефективності.
that pertains
Нагадаю
to
вам, що в Україні було
the
імплементовано
availability of
тільки
the
на законодавчому
legislative
рівні,
framework that meets the principles of the energy efficiency. Let me remind you that in Ukraine they implemented not only at the legislative level, but sometimes even at the normative level, I mean at the level of the state construction norms, all principles of energy efficiency that are there in the European Union. So whatever pertains to the availability in Ukraine, the legislative base for construction standards for building energy efficient objects, not only housing, we have already implemented this and this can be used. Many thanks, Serhiy. Maybe you can try. Good evening. Truly, I would want to start with what the state agency is doing in this. Nowadays, it's very important for us that these projects where the Hromadas were building housing in their communities, it should be high quality. I want to remind you that the implementation of this project will be taking place directly in Hromadas, and all the procedures, tender procedures and the construction, everything will be responsible at the level. Hromadas will be responsible for all of this, but we as the agency, we should provide for the quality of the projects. We are choosing the projects nowadays, and we have to provide this selection for Hromadas, the choice, the number of floors, the technology of construction, to make sure we can give them something that would fit them best, exclusively in their Hromadas. What I mean, you are absolutely right, you raised this question absolutely correctly, that not in each Hromada there could be an availability of enough workforce, the construction people. So we will be proposing the projects of the construction complexes, that's special concrete, also prefab projects that can be quickly built, but the quality should not change. To make sure that the Hromada could choose what is necessary for them, but to provide for the quality of the projects, preliminary with our partners is the European Anti-Corruption Initiative. They can help us in the checking of the cost estimates of these projects. We're also checking the technical quality, the inclusivity, the effectiveness, some maybe other generation, maybe solar energy, the usage of heat pumps as the possibility to add to these projects. That's why nowadays we're doing this work. The Embassy of Great Britain that is helping us with education using the digital system of BIM, also ready to finance and to design one house as in this digital system of BIM. And this will be very important for us because this project can be easily adapted in various Hromadas. What else we are doing? We are checking those sections that are given to us by Hromadas. There was a very correct remark that we have to clearly understand that there has to be a city infrastructure, social infrastructure, the networks, to make sure that these projects could quickly and effectively implemented. But I want to mention that with Ukrainian Hromadas, we have experience. We have the European Commission project for the construction of social housing. The 10 cities of Ukraine already implement these projects. That's why they have the experience. And we can say that when the Ukrainian Hromadas are proposed to participate, there were a lot of people who wished about this, to take part in this project, and in some Hromadas there were also some refusals. Maybe they didn't have the land plots, maybe they thought that something was not necessary. There were even such Hromadas, but in my opinion, that is not a proper policy. And strategically, they can lose if we can not be able, if they're not able to get these people in their Hromadas. Thank you. Many thanks. Maybe you can talk in more detail how you're choosing the Hromadas with whom to cooperate. The Hromada that they believe that they have the land plot, but they don't have the capacity. Can they turn to you in order to get such assistance in the construction? Or you can, how are you working, from top down or from bottom up? Maybe I can comment. Yes, we took the information for the Ministry of Social Policy in terms of which cities have the highest number of IDPs registered. And as I said in my information, in this pilot project, we will concentrate exactly on these categories. That's why we have checked in which cities there is the biggest number of IDPs, and we started to work with them, understanding that in such cities, people will have accessibility to workplaces, to the available city infrastructure. We have checked that these cities would be capable to use lending. The funds that Grzegorz mentioned, these are the lending resources of the European Investment Bank, and correspondingly, the local governance bodies that will be the usage of this loan should be capable to provide its implementation. On the one hand, from the other hand, it should be really the interest of the local authorities to implement such projects, because when we were processing this at the first stage with the wide circle of local governance, sometimes we would get the refusal, and we understand that we would still need to work in more detail with them and to explain to them why formation of such funds for the local governance is important. So that's why the first is the concentration of the IDPs, and secondly is the capacity, and number three is interest on their behalf. Many thanks, and we just talked and to understand that Kryvyi Rih.
І у вас, пане Константине, є проекти якраз з приводу
But
соціального
as far as I
житла. Можете, будь
understand, you
ласка,
have received a lot of
свої
IDPs.
ініціативи і
And
як
I
ви
know, Mr.
вирішили цю
Konstantin,
проблему?
you have some projects related to the social housing. Maybe you can talk more about these initiatives and how we are solving this. Many thanks, Ms. Alexandra. Konstantin Belikov, Deputy Head of City Mayor, together with my colleagues from the Department of Social Protection and the Department of the Development of Infrastructure. Many thanks to Ms. Natalia for the very resourceful information, which is very important for all Hromadas. In terms of IDPs, the population of the city of Kryvyi Rih of 2024 was 690,000 dwellers. And in our city, we first had, since the start of ATO in 2014, we implemented during this time, because we faced with the war not in 2022, but rather 2014. We already implemented several projects in our city. That is, Mr. Tuka was heading this. We received, in terms of the purchase of apartments for social housing. We found some money in the state budget. We bought some 18 apartments. We placed people there, and this was the first stage. So we had to find donors, and we engaged the investment program of the city. We found some powerful and strong partners from international and the Ukrainian Fund of Social Investments, and together with the German bank KfW, we implemented the project in terms of the reconstruction of the first floor of the hostel. It used to be a simple, normal, regular hostel. There was 8 rooms in the corridor and 1 toilet. So we redid it to 18 apartments using the German technologies. They had chandeliers, they had Rihau windows, ventilation, outlets, energy efficiency. So all of it we did 1, 2, and 2.5 rooms. This was for children. There were some people with disability, so they needed to have a bigger apartment. So we placed these people there, and this project was very successful for us because the apartments were received not only people who had these difficult life circumstances in all senses, IDPs, but they were also received by teachers, engineers, doctors. The city of Kryvyi Rih has all the items that Natalia said, the infrastructure, the developed infrastructure, and most importantly, the workplaces for IDPs. So IDPs from Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, this is mining, coal production industries. People have experience of working of this heavy industry. They are quickly adapted. In our city, we have the developed infrastructure of the city. We have land plots. But what is keeping us, what is interfering with us nowadays with such attention? We are looking into these issues. In the first place, truly, to develop and to put to life projects of the investment in terms of our on the basis of this is not properly justified. There are some existing laws of Ukraine. There is the housing code, and if it's so narrow, it can't compete with all of this. I understand that it has to be done, but it has to be done everything on time. Codes, laws, then bylaws, the way like Cabinet of Ministers resolutions. And if we are taking resolution today and tomorrow, the codes remain old, but the resolution will be new. This will not work, you understand? So all the issues of arguments will be resolved on the basis of laws, not resolutions. This is my impression. So we implemented the project when in the resolution there was no criteria of how this is to be done. Nowadays, in case we take the current resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers, 692, which criteria of placing people, then I can, and if we imagine that we already have the building of social housing in the city of Kryvyi Rih, with the help of EIB, I can't place a person there whose income is higher than 3,523 hryvnia. Dear colleagues, 3,000 hryvnia per month and not more. Where can I find these homeless people? I can't even imagine where we can have such a person, because the minimum salary is 8,600. As was mentioned, one of the criteria, there has to be the payback capacity. So it should not be a dotation, a subsidy from the city, from the government. Of course, it can be targeted, but not permanently to save people. So we need to make sure that the people can pay utilities, they can pay for the rent. No single city can cover this with their own budget. I'm working as a deputy mayor since 2010, so I believe I have certain experience in these problems. So it has to be really well grounded to the fact which criteria of the profitability, of the income level of the family, for those who will be renting this, because they say to rent social housing. And one more thing, in the first presentation, dear Maria, yes, Ms. Maria, temporary social housing, dear colleagues, let us separate. Borscht is separately and the flies separately. Let's not take into account income, and we need to take into account this. We are putting it in one pile and we don't understand it. How we can then maintain this housing? Who will be paying which rent? So let us decide to separate it from the legislative point of view, so we have a similar understanding of these terms at the level of the Cabinet of Ministers resolution, that this housing is like this, because if it's temporary, it's social. Unfortunately, that doesn't work like this. I have a question to you, Mr. Konstantin. The options that you are talking about, these hostels, did you give it to some people? Or they remain in the ownership of the city? Or did you pass it? Yes, it remains with the ownership of the city. Yes, it is the communal property of the city, and they use the rent agreements. They live there. We don't pass ownership to them. We are also working with our reliable partners, with the Fund of Social Investments, the KfW Bank. Also, we had the ambassador of Germany coming over to us just some 2 months ago. So we are launching with them another project. We are reconstructing, rebuilding the former profilactorium in order to decrease the cost for the social infrastructure. We created some land plot. Everything was rebuilt. We engaged even foreign investment in this project. On the 26th, we will have the competition finalized and we will define the contractor that will be working on this. We have another one which is in Germany. We have to decide what's happening after Christmas in terms of the reconstruction of the incomplete house. We have still the house somewhere from the Soviet times. Several times we wanted to reconstruct it, but without success. But now the time is such that people do require housing, and we also agreed, and we have intention, it says 88 full-scale apartments with the shelter. The shelter is being built by the Germans. So this is the project which we'll be implementing. Even the Germans agreed. It's about creation of housing conditions for the temporary housing for IDPs. Not social, but temporary housing, because the city is interested to host and to preserve this staff, medical workers, because the hospital of Pokrovsk moved to us. We're creating conditions for them. Also, another hospital is coming over to us, so we want to make sure that these people would stay in the city, that they would really give services to their colleagues, to IDPs from the cities that are coming from us. So we are interested. So we have the qualified engineers from the mining regions so that they would stay within our city. Many thanks. There is the question in the chat for you that housing, that municipality of Kryvyi Rih, who is heading this? Is this you have a special, a separate communal company, or who's managing this? We did a competition among the governors of this house, and yes, we have the manager, special manager, who manages it. Allow me to give a quick reply to Kryvyi Rih. In the first place, Kryvyi Rih is one of the participants of the project, in case you have this wish, but the working group was created, and I think Ms. Natalia can't join, so I would like to explain the situation. We have created a working group for the implementation of this project, which we have the local governance bodies that can participate in this project. And at this working group, they work on all the issues related also, including the ones that you have mentioned today. A separate resolution that will be adopted, and the draft resolution is already available and is already in the working group, and it clearly says that to rent the social housing, people who officially are working with the average calculation of average salary. And the second element, part of the apartments, because it's changing so quickly, I think 25 or 30 apartments, the local governance bodies can define themselves the criteria with which they will give this housing to the people who they believe it's necessary. This could be a physicist at school, or the screwdriver, or the driver. So all the wishes from Hromadas, they should be taken into account. 99% of all requests are taken into account. So participating in these working groups, and then you will have a few questions. Mrs. Serhiy, I apologize, but in this working group, in this chat, you know that there is the chat that is created with the necessary sources. I'm personal in this chat. I have given examples over there, and we have a table there with coefficients for each oblast. I don't agree absolutely with this. We discussed this at some Hromadas. And by the way, the coefficient 0.73, which is applied for Kryvyi Rih, I'm saying that without even this resolution, 3,523 hryvnia as the cap. And with this new resolution, we'll have 6,000 hryvnia. We took it into account. I can really show it to you within all the documents. You see, it's already 6,000. So the cap for Kryvyi Rih will be 6,700 hryvnia, and for Lviv it's 18,000. How can you explain this? And this is still in that chat. If you're there, please check this correspondence. That means my sister from the Pokrovsk doctor, she will not get the housing because she has the salary of 15,000. She will not stay with us. She will go to Lviv because they will have 18,000. So we have already the minimum salary. We have to even use the 0.73 coefficient. So I don't agree that this coefficient is to be taken into account. Give the possibility to Serhiy to reply. Serhiy, please talk. That's why we have this working group, and in today's working group we discussed the draft resolution. So there is no figure, as you said, 3,000 hryvnia. The average salary in the region and the coefficient, of course, is there. And in case it's created for this, to make sure you can make your comments, and these comments are taken into account. It's not yet adopted. There is only draft. So we still have time to work on this and to take care of all of these aspects. You have to know that there is a big percentage. The Hromadas will decide themselves who they should give the social housing to, even if the person isn't having enough in terms of their salary. You will have the possibility as the Hromada to pay 1,000 or 2,000 hryvnia additionally to make sure you can keep this person within the Hromada. And this is all foreseen by this resolution. Thank you. This is more in terms of the ministry, but I know that Ms. Natalia spends a lot of effort to make everything ideal, and she can't talk professional about it, so I'm trying to explain that the work is ongoing and that your remarks are being taken into consideration. Ms. Natalia, are you there? Because in terms of the draft law, I think this average salary, the draft law doesn't regulate at all the level of salary. We made a decision that any norms, let's put it this way, that they are subject to change. We don't set it in the law. We decided that we will regulate this because that gives the possibility to be more flexible and implementing one or the other direction. When it comes to approaches, we're discussing at this working group not the figures, because we have several options of approaches, how conduct this calculation. And you're right, in each settlement is different, and we have to find some golden medium that can be used for every settlement, taking into account their specific circumstances. For instance, if we take the city of Kryvyi Rih and the city of Zhytomyr and the city of Zaporizhia, then in these settlements, the worst will be in the city of Zaporizhia, which is quite strange because it's an oblast center. I suggest not to discuss the approaches. Once we finalize the approaches, that should take into account the issues that Kshekos mentioned about the payback capacity, because we're talking about the payback possibility. So our common objective is to find that golden medium that will provide for the possibilities for people and the payback for functioning. So this work is in progress. And really, in the last versions, we foresaw to put it on the local governance, to put the responsibility in terms of the calculation of the rent, because to do this centralized is not possible. But the requirement of provision of payback capacity, this will be a must. I apologize, there are some questions to Serhiy and Natalia, knowing that they may go. From Yuri, can you also, is there any possibility to participate in the programs of social housing construction for the local government on the temporarily occupied territories? What is their function and responsibility in this? Do they have the right to take part and to receive the relevant financing?
Давайте я спробую, тільки я спробую без відео, мене все однак не видно, я перепрошую. Що стосується того, чого підприємства
Allow me to start without video. Apologies that you don't see me. when it comes to whether the companies can be a part of this first pilot project. As of now, we are working on the concept to make sure that in the first pilot project, we would be cooperating with the local governance authorities, understanding that these funds that we are talking about will be in communal ownership of the local governance bodies. I'm sure about this, and we talked about this with the European Investment Bank once we start this process and once it becomes clear to us that the approaches that we are using, they're possible for the implementation and we are reaching the objective that we have, then we will be talking about some other directions, but so far we don't talk about that. Allow me to slightly add. I believe that the question was from those hromadas that are temporarily occupied nowadays, because they also approached me during the Congress in Lviv and they asked this question. So it's exactly about this. Yes, we would be interested that the hromadas would be able to participate, especially that they have funds on the treasury's accounts, and I believe not on the first stage, but maybe on the second stage. 6.5 thousand apartments, that's really few. It's the possibility to work on all the mechanisms, all the resolutions, the tender documentations, and after that we will come to much bigger volumes, and I believe that the hromadas can participate at a later stage. Allow me to add, I did not understand everything. The line is broken. Okay, maybe I tried to close the video. You can now hear me, yes. I just didn't understand that we are talking about the local governance bodies that left from the temporarily occupied territory. With the mayor of Mariupol, we are now working on the mechanism of forming, including the funds of social housing at the expense of local governance bodies who left. Why it's important? Because it's a very specific form of financing which is foreseen by the decision of the government to use the funds of local budgets who left from the occupied territories. And I think as soon as we test the approaches and we'll understand that we can propose to them to other cities, we will present them to everybody. Now we are still working on that. Many thanks. Tatiana, I would like to move to you. I know that you were engaged in this process of the development of legislation, and possibly you want to add something, but in general, today I have responded several times that it's a question to Tatiana, because management of housing fund is yours. So maybe you can comment the draft laws, what needs to be done to effectively implement this, all of this. Many thanks. In the first place, let me reflect on the issues which I have heard that already were mentioned about the standards in accordance to which the buildings are constructed. We have some minimum standards of energy efficiency, and I believe they're quite good. They are lower than in Europe, but they're quite good. The main issue is that we stick to them. But rather than, so on paper, things may be good, but in reality, different. So with the support of the European Climate Foundation, we will be developing methodology. I can't tell you, I immediately tell you that it's not going to be simple, but anybody who wishes can participate. And in case this C, energy efficiency class, it's C, because in fact it can happen that it's one on the paper, the other one in reality. And Natalia Kozlovska is being too modest, but if she didn't connect, we wouldn't have anything. And I really hope that in the near future, this is just the issue of several days, we will adopt the requirements to the standard of construction, and all the donors can all the donors will be able to finance according to the new standards. We have analyzed a lot of countries. Ours will not be worse than in other countries, so this will be very high standards and quite cool. So we have a choice to build either in accordance with the law, using the minimum standards, or using the NZEP standards. You can put the official announcement that it's an official standard. What else I wanted to comment about hromadas? This is the question that was discussed nowadays. We had several hromadas coming over to us. We have memorandums with 75 hromadas who want either to build something and to host people, or the ones who want to receive some part of the financing, but they want that it's not rent, that it will be some permanent housing. They understand that unlikely they will come back in the near future to their hromadas, to these territories, because these territories are occupied. And as Serhiy Sukhomlyn said, they have this money on their accounts and they want to make sure. I mean, I have several concepts from the citizens of Bakhmut, the ones who have the vision, what they would want to do. Let's put it this way. It could be some mini Bakhmut in some hromada, maybe neighborhood, like we have Britain neighborhood, we have some other neighborhood. So they want to have this neighborhood called Bakhmut. And also another reflection, we are now talking about the social housing. We're talking a lot, we're communicating a lot with IDPs from occupied territories. And nowadays, the draft law was adopted, which we also have supported, something that has been talked about for a long time, 11161, that allows, basically equals the rights of people whose property was damaged or destroyed on the deoccupied territory, which is now a controlled territory, or on the occupied territory, so they both get the right for compensation. But what is happening? Everybody will wait till they will receive full compensation. In accordance with resolution number 600, they will receive certificates. And in the comments, if you analyze this, some of the deputies was writing that this draft law was adopted. So IDPs from the occupied territories comment, okay, we don't want to go to social housing. Finally, we will have our own normal, regular housing. But even if the funds of the state budget are redistributed, it can be maximum 10,000 apartments. We have 4.5 million of IDPs, that's like 1 million of households. So on average, we need some 1 million of apartments. The question is how many years we would need to provide housing to all these people. And I don't know, donors. I was participating in a lot of negotiations with the World Bank. They don't want to finance this program of the full compensation. Therefore, I have this very unpopular proposal, idea in terms of compensation. It's to give partial compensation, a little bit to everybody, to make sure that people would have a choice. Either they either live in the social housing, or they rent housing, or they invest this contribution. This could be the first down payment into this special discounted lending from KfW or some other program, or some housing construction cooperative, the legislation of which is still not there, it's in the future, or it will be in the future. 1 out of 100 get an apartment, and the others don't do, and they also expect that they will get the certificate and they will be able to buy something for themselves. I have a question. What about the law about the inventory of the housing that could define the type of housing that could be rented to IDPs? Do you believe this? Is it realistic to do? Would that truly depend whether the authorities understand it properly. Everything is very clear here. Once again, we have supported this draft law. We are in permanent contact with Mr. Frolov and to this parliamentary group. But the question is that it's just not there. This is just, you can count it with your one hand, that you can take and you can place people there. The other idea, which I believe and which is still there, something that was given to us by Hromadas. Korosteń Hromada gave us as first, and who else? Some other Hromada from the Kiev Oblast, I forgot which one was that. This is the list out of 7 objects. That's former schools, kindergartens, hospitals which are not used according to their designation because of the reform, the medical reform, for instance. So it happened that these buildings can't be used according to the original designation, and they're ready to transfer them. There are some already projects. Of course, they need to pay for the design documentation, and then they have to redo it, and that's not small money. Okay, they have calculated how much money that is. In Korosteń, for instance, with the former hospital, this is the housing for 52 apartments for IDPs, for whom they have already found job in the Hromadas. Because it's important that it's not just some housing that is very remote, and it's not clear what people will be doing there. This has to be within the Hromada. It should be really social. It's important that people would pay rent for it, and that it should provide its payback possibilities. So we should start not from the new construction, but rather from these premises that Hromadas have already prepared. I don't know whether we have Habitat. I have invited them to this meeting, but I know that they're building one project of that kind in Kalusha. Just yesterday we said about 2 more projects in the potential Hromadas. I will not talk openly which are these, in order to show how it will work, this model. But once again, that requires engaged funds. It's not just that tomorrow they're ready to come there with people and to live there, because it's going to be worse than the places of compact residence that we have now, because we're saying that's social housing, that it has to be as full-scale housing rather than place of survival for people, right? Many, many thanks. At this point, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Ivan. You are making a lot of research in terms of IDPs. Do you think that the social housing program will work, or this is something that is very much needed? Is it compatible with Celia, or maybe we should change the modality? And in terms of the consequences that we have discussed today, maybe you would want to reflect on something. Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Ms. Natalia, Ms. Grzegorz for the important work that they're doing. I want to demonstrate a few slides. This is the research that we have done several months ago about the situation with housing now. And just for the overall context, I will say a few words about what you have asked. If we look, as Ms. Natalia said, that we have 95-97 of housing fund is in private ownership. But if we look not in apartments as units of housing, but rather as people, we exclude the investment real estate that the people bought where they don't live. So we can see that the percentage of people who live in the rented houses, it's already huge. In the oblast centers, it's already 30%. In the smaller cities, it's less, but still, it's already quite a significant number. We talked about the European countries. If we put it in the context of the European Union, then Ukraine looks quite very much on average. We believe that Ukraine is somewhere on the pole, but this is not really the case. We already have some 20-25 people who live in the rented housing. That's already a lot of people. So the idea that supposedly everybody lives in own housing and the rent of social housing or temporary housing, this is a bias that doesn't reflect the reality, which is shown by the data which we have at the moment. So that's one important subject, because we already have such people. That's already a fact. People already live in the rented apartments. People are ready to live in the rented housing. It's not that sometimes they want it or not want to have the ownership, but it's about their capability. We also have some other indicator about the accessibility, affordability of the housing. It's when you pay not more than 30%. Unfortunately, the housing is affordable only for 60% of the population. 40% of the population spend more than 30% of their monthly income for housing, that both who are renting and who live in own apartment but can't pay for utilities. That's a significant indicator, and it's very important for the conversation which modalities should be taken into account. The next schedule, if we look the next graph, if we take those who rent, of course IDPs are the biggest group who rented this, and if we talk about 40 or 40 from to 60, it's less percentage that the elder people above 60, 65% of people, more than 65%, 65 years old, they have to save. Those who rent apartments, they have to save on food. That's a huge. So 60 plus people, there are 65% of those who rent, they have to save on food. So that's very urgent. And one other graph which I wanted to show you, it's exactly what people will be doing if in case something happens to their housing, if God forbid the missile arrives. So this is the data that is quite stable. We have conducted also a similar question several years ago and now, and we can see that independently by other housing, it's like 2%. Some 15% have the opportunity to rent other housing. Somebody may go to relatives. At least half of the people don't know what to do. Basically, that fits the data that the people don't have the resource in order to independently provide themselves with housing, which leads me to a few things which I wanted to mention about the social housing. Talking about mortgage or talking about other programs when the state gives housing in ownership. So, of course, we have a limited resource that we can spend. That's the limited resource of the budget, that's the limited resource of our partners. And the question is, who are we prioritizing? Either the pensioners, IDPs, who are saving on food, or the people who have the possibility to buy housing, but they do require assistance with the mortgage, possibly who are saving on food. Maybe that's our first priority. On the poster of this event, we depicted the modular town in Lviv. People live there for 3 years. To live for 3 years in this plastic container or in the refurbished sports gym of school, of course, this is no decent life. And basically, these are the places where people have to be moved into a decent social housing. And people who live in this Mariupolis, they have children, they have disability, these are the older people. They don't have the capacity to take mortgage. They can't provide themselves own housing. So for them, social housing is the only way out. And that's why we need programs of social housing. And it's also important to pay attention to various legal aspects. This Mariupol is not a social housing, that's the place of temporary stay. There is some temporary housing, so all the things are important. It's important to separate them, and also hoping that the legislation will regulate it even better. But I want us not to think that the social housing is this bad containers, that we don't form this biased associations about the marginalized housing. In many countries of Europe, it's very modern, it's very beautiful, and that's something that we should strive for. And number two, it's also the question of the capacity of municipalities of managing this housing. It's not the housing that we have of the condominiums or the multi-story buildings. It's one thing that you are managing housing which is in the private ownership. The other thing is if it's in social housing. So I just would like to thank to the ministry, to the EIB, to the agency who are working on this. And I really hope that this work will bring to a pilot project that we'll be able to learn a lot and to really move a lot as a country to this. Many thanks. You really have very good. Maybe you can put a link in the chat to this research. I think our participants will be very much interested in reading this. Thank you, Alexandra. I just wanted to propose to Ivan to join our resolution of social housing. I think we both will be interested on the one hand. On the other hand, I want to comment that the places of temporary stay, we don't believe that this is the objects of housing designation. So for us, it's definitely not the picture of the social housing, something that we are talking about. We have to understand that in the countries of the European Union, social housing, it's the housing for people with various levels of income who have the possibility with the rent which is lower than the market price, or if they have a high income, then using the market rate to rent such housing. But nowadays, in Ukraine, we have problems that need to be resolved, and we are all discussing this in the context, let's put it this way, of the urgent provision through various ways, the issue of internal displaced people. So our first job is the IDPs, but as a prospect, it's formulation of funds for various types of people with various incomes. There was also a question how to join the working group, if it's still possible to engage into that work group. No problem, but we are working now with the ones local governance authorities who are interested in its implementation. So in case the bodies of the local governance are interested, my contacts are available. Don't hesitate, do write to me. So we are talking with everybody who have this possibility, this capacity, and has needs. Thank you so much. Grzegorz, I can see your hand is up, and I also wanted to address two questions from the chat to you, if possible. The first question, under which rules will there be tenders for companies who will be building the social housing? Would that be the ProZorro rules or the separate rules from the investment bank? And the second question, that there is a need to renovate or rebuild the available schools or the former hospitals, whether EIB can invest into that in order to transform these institutions, these premises into the social housing. Thank you. In the first place, when we're talking about the public procurement, our approach in Ukraine is working for many years. We give the possibility to use the ProZorro program, which is the state program of public procurement, also to engage services in the projects which we are financing. So we will continue to use ProZorro. And the second question, I absolutely agree that the priority should be to use the existing buildings if they're nicely placed, if they're good enough to rebuild them, refurbish them, and turn them into public housing, then of course the priority should be given to such projects, because that's quicker, and possibly the infrastructure is already connected to these buildings, and that will be much more effective and much more quick from the point of view of the speed to turn such buildings into public housing. And the third thing which I wanted to mention, I wanted to recommend to comment of one of the topics that was talked about by Mr. Verbitsky. With great interest, I was looking at this data. That's actually really positive data, where it shows where we should move. But it also shows the picture that it is as dark, and there are special possibilities where to choose these groups from and how to help them. But irrespective that I agree with the majority with what has been said, I still want to say one thing. If we look at the European experience of the construction of social housing, we can say that there is one lecture which I wanted to remind you, and this lecture is to build social housing for the narrow described socioeconomic groups, this was a mistake. Possibly they require more assistance or the most of the assistance, but in case we place together the people of social economic situation is the same, they would have the same problems. That creates the ghetto kind of situations. That's not helpful. And on the basis of this topic, the European social programs give advantage to programs which mix up people in one apartment house, people who have different socio-economical situation. Because such projects, such places live finally better, people help each other, they have the mutual protection mechanism, mutual assistance, and from the financial point of view, the financial flows actually work better in these apartments. So maybe this one lecture I want to really spare it with you. And before we pass the floor to Ivan for your reply, whenever you said that the share of social housing, I meant exactly social housing that is more in Europe than in Ukraine. We talked about the share of the social housing, not the rented housing. When we talk about the rented housing, I want to remind you that the government this year finally adopted a decision that there would be subsidies for the rent of housing. This also was something that differentiated us from other European countries. But I do forecast that it will not start working. Yes, there is this concern, but in any case, this has been already reflected, and that's very good. Ivan, please, the floor is yours. Yeah, that it's been done, it's very good. I'm also not sure, but let's see. I would agree with what Mr. Grzegorz said, that certainly shouldn't be, we should really strive for this inclusion. And we have the practice in Ukraine, like in Ivano-Frankivsk, that they're working to mix up people who have different capacity to pay or not to pay. So it seems to me that this solution is something that we should strive for and understand this is probably not the project for the pilot project, but rather a project or the issue for a more wide regulation, so that we don't have any commercial newly built that is built sold only on the commercial market and separately social housing. I would also agree that this has to be mixed up in the houses. That's on the one hand, and from the other hand, and in the framework of the fund of social housing, there are various options of people who can't afford to pay for rent at all and who can put in the rent, but which is affordable for them, or the commercial possible. So also from what we know, from our work with Hromadas, we also know that in many Hromadas there is this request to have the municipal housing fund in order that they could engage professionals who are necessary in Hromadas, teachers, doctors, and other professionals. And this is exactly something that could satisfy this need. Many thanks, and what Ivan has said, I just wanted to remind you that we talked today about Kryvyi Rih. In 2014, I had the first experience when I saw in Kryvyi Rih when the former hostel was refurbished into apartments, and part of the apartments they gave to family doctors. They had a pilot project for the health protection. These are some local stimuli that they talk a lot about when we build a social fund of housing. It says that part of the apartments will be at the disposal of the government, and they can give this to these categories of employees. I just wanted to say that this was a pilot project. Yes, truly, we refurbished the apartment, 82 apartments exclusively for medical workers. And it was a very good ambulatorium. I never saw such a level of ambulatorium in Kiev. Mr. Grzegorz, I also have a question in chat. Your contacts, Yuri Bova is asking. That's the mayor of Trostanets. Maybe you can write to him a private message or give your contacts. See what is more convenient for you. Tetiana? I just recollected a question. I saw it in the chat, that's why I wanted to mention. There is the problem with the re-equipping of educational institutions. I can't say medical. I didn't go deep inside in this topic to make it into social housing, because there is direct ban of the law on education. And the law of Frolov about inventory, they introduced changes, but what was adopted in the first reading and as what is in the result, that actually differs a lot. With all the lawyers with whom I have consulted, really there is a problem. There are some hromadas that can change the designation, and with the decision they can transfer it. But I think that unless we have changes to the specialized law, this will be really slowed down, and the city mayor will continue to be afraid that there could be some criminal case against him. Many thanks for emphasizing these problems. I wanted us to comment, because to me it seems like it was changed. You're absolutely you're absolutely right. If I'm not mistaken, in 2022 there was a decision taken, and the changes to the law were taken when, for the objects of housing complex for IDPs, the decision about changing of designation is taken by the local governance authorities by the developing of the responsive scheme of the change of this land plot, which is to be approved by the architect of the city. And once they develop the city documentation of the local level, this information should be included in the documentation of the local level. Many thanks, because I remember this. I think a lot of partners have been helping us in this issue. We were afraid there could be a huge criticism about this, because we understand that this question can be used by various ways, in various channels, but we still understood its importance. Thank you. Just very quickly, I want to explain to my context. Of course, you can pass my context to everybody, but we, as the European Investment Bank, we have, for the time being, the interaction with the government of Ukraine. So the distribution of funds, the selection of places, this will be done together with the government. This is not for us to decide on our own. This will be done by the ministry and the agency of recovery, because they explained how they will be choosing this for the implementation of those pilot projects. So certainly, with great pleasure, I could talk to Yuri Bova what we are doing, but to participate in the project, you have to be in the contact with the representatives of the government. Many thanks to all the speakers who have agreed to participate and be with us. Ms. Natalia, many thanks to you for your efforts and for being the whole event. It's been very precious for all of us knowing how busy you are. Many thanks to all the participants. Very active chat today. We have lots of questions. I apologize who I couldn't read, but we will keep these questions. If necessary, we will respond. And once again, when we talk about social housing, we can understand that this journey is just started to change 70 laws, lots of resolutions, and then still to implement it, to monitor it, and then we need financing. That's why still a lot of questions will take place. Many thanks for the ministry, to the ministry, for the openness, for the dialogue. That's very precious nowadays. The presentation will be available on the website. The recording will also be available on the website, on Facebook of BRP. And we are very much thankful to the armed forces of Ukraine that we can conduct this discussions and talk about the recovery and reconstruction. Many thanks. Wish everybody a quiet evening. Goodbye. Alexander, from my side, I would also like to thank, because something that we have started to do. First of all, there is this political will, it's good, but secondly, without you, we wouldn't do anything, because there is a huge number of work, and those who are standing side by side with us and help us, that's super precious. Without you, it will not work out. I have also a proposal that you would copy the chat, and maybe we can try to give answers. Yes, we will preserve the chat, and that's what I said, to make sure we can respond. Tatiana, thank you for helping to answer the questions. That's also very effective. But what Natalia said, what we are seeing in Ukraine, in case this golden triangle of cooperation, the authorities, the civil society, and the donors, then the reforms are implemented very effectively. Thank you.